So my name is Matt. I am currently at Spiral. I've been doing the Bitcoin thing for 15 years now, more than 15 years. I helped co-found Blockstream back in the day. I worked at Chaincode Labs, and I work at Spiral. Worked on Bitcoin Core for almost a decade. I've now been working on Lightning stuff for almost a decade. So I've been around a minute. I'm going to talk about Bitcoin in a world with quantum computers. I am going to mostly represent my views. I think these are relatively accurate in terms of what other people think, what's most likely to happen. There is at least some disagreement, but I think for the most part, it's accurate for what most people think. So everyone knows that we're going to get quantum computers one day, and Bitcoin's going to collapse, and that's going to be the end of it, right? For those of you who aren't super familiar with it, so a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, which is a different beast from a quantum computer, but a CRQC, can calculate a private key from a public key, right? So you have this public key that appears in a transaction, and that goes on chain, and then everyone sees it, and then they can calculate the private key for it, and they can steal your funds either from a wallet if you're reusing addresses, or maybe just from the address, or maybe fast if the transaction's still in the mempool. For the purposes of this talk, it doesn't really matter. There's a little bit of nuance there, but this is a 20-minute talk, so I'm definitely not going to get into it. The key point is someone has a computer that could, in theory, just steal Bitcoin from people who are doing the right thing, whose key didn't leak, nothing like that. There's some additional questions about mining. Again, this is a 20-minute talk. I'm not going to get into it. That research is still a little earlier. Probably it's not a big deal, but I'm just going to reference it so that I don't get someone yelling at me that I didn't mention it. So we're talking about a cryptographically relevant quantum computer. What does this mean? It is a quantum computer, but scaled up hugely. So there does appear to exist some kind of quantum computers today, right? They have not been able to perform even very simplified versions of what you need to actually do anything relevant to cryptography. They have not yet factored a number using a generic algorithm, right? They haven't been able to say, okay, 15, let's calculate that that is actually 5 times 3. They have been able to do related things like, oh, well, 15 has a specific structure, and we can prove that 15 equals 5 times 3, but okay, so what? Anyone can do that. There are, of course, those who believe that we're going to, in the next year, get artificial superintelligence, not just AGI, but ASI, and that's going to lead to some major physics breakthroughs, and we're going to get a CRQC next year or 2 years, or people were saying this 3 years ago, so I guess last year we were supposed to get one. But in practice, the experts actually working on quantum computers still, and as well as the NSA and government agencies around the world, still think that the transition has to be done in something like a decade from now still, right? So we still have some time before we see something like a CRQC. Of course, that doesn't mean we shouldn't get moving. After all, it does take many years for Bitcoin to transition to anything, nor is that to say that people aren't already making progress on the first steps. And in fact, there is some decent progress being made on the first steps, but we still have some time before this becomes a real material issue. Okay, so what does this transition look like? What are these first steps that people are actually working on today? So the first step is hopefully pretty obvious. There are cryptographic signature schemes that are not insecure in the face of a CRQC. Bitcoin needs to enable them. Bitcoin needs to have that as an option. Of course, those PQC schemes, post-quantum cryptography schemes, are slower, bigger, and don't support a lot of the features that we want that modern crypto wallets use, or at least the ones that do support some of those features have questionable security. So we're stuck with these big ones. And of course, adding a new optional signature scheme to Bitcoin that people could opt into and start upgrading to doesn't really work if those signatures that people would have to use are bigger and slower and thus have higher fees. And I mean materially higher fees. And wallets are just going to choose, well, maybe I'll put this off, right? And so that would kind of defeat the point. If we're adding a signature scheme that people don't use, why are we even bothering if everyone's going to put it off? So instead, the first step has to be something where the signature scheme isn't used until it's needed and also adds no cost to have that fallback. Now, luckily, that is in fact possible. This was a key design goal of Taproot. And Now, more recently, Tim Ruffing published a proof that actually the fallback scheme to add these secondary public key commitments in Taproot is quantum secure. It was a design goal. It's nice to have a formal proof now. So we should probably use that, right? So we start with that. So great. So we add some opcode to validate post-quantum cryptography signatures as a part of Taproot, op shrinks or whatever, and then wallets start adopting it, right? So then we're done, right? Not so much. Wallet adoption historically in Bitcoin for any new feature has been incredibly slow. I don't think this will be materially different. Wallets probably can start branding themselves as quantum secure, and maybe that'll lead to a little faster uptake than other historical Bitcoin protocol changes. But ultimately, this is kind of up to Bitcoiners to choose wallets where they won't have to rush to migrate kind of at the last minute. So that's just where it is. Okay, so then what, right? So we add some optional scheme, wallets start to migrate to it. Hopefully they do it over a number of years and long before Quantum Day, before Q Day. Then what? There's still tons of wallets that probably haven't upgraded by that point, that are still using old software, that might still be active. What do we do? So it turns out there's actually a trick that all cryptocurrencies can employ, or most of them, that isn't really talked about enough, and that is that seed phrases are actually quantum secure. So the way that a wallet goes from a seed phrase to a private key that's used on chain, a quantum computer cannot reverse all the way through that. It would be expensive, and so relatively expensive on chain, but also large and slow. But you could, in fact, do a quantum secure proof, a ZK proof, that you know the seed phrase that was used to create the wallet, that was used to create the private key that was used on chain. And so you could, in fact, require this. Could we scroll the speaker notes down? I don't know if that's... I've got a mouse there. Thank you. So we could allow some of these unupgraded wallets to claim their funds after Q Day by using one of these proofs. It would be, the fee would be 10 times, maybe 100 times larger than normal, but at least they wouldn't lose their funds. But this relies on a very important decision and a very important question, the million Bitcoin question, right? So does Bitcoin burn coins that are quantum vulnerable, or does it allow them to be stolen by someone who owns a CRQC? So allowing seed phrase-based wallets to claim their funds via one of these ZK proofs means this would only impact a very small minority of active wallets, a very tiny minority of active wallets, but a lot of coins, right? So a lot of very early miners, coins that have been lost, that have been sitting on chain since 2010, 2011, that haven't been touched. All of those coins are presumably lost, many of them presumably lost, but they probably won't upgrade. And so that's still millions of coins potentially available to be stolen. So how does Bitcoin decide this? Who decides? It's not developers. It's not some small cabal. Ultimately, it's the market, right? So in every cryptocurrency, the way that decisions are ultimately made when they're contentious is that there's either a futures market or a live market for two sides of a fork, and market participants evaluate which coin they think has value based on the value they ascribed to Bitcoin. They sell the one that they don't like, they buy the one that they do, and that's how we make decisions. So we saw this very clearly with SegWit2x. The exchanges have a strong incentive to create the market, to create the futures market, because they make money, they're creating markets. And participants will use it to opt in to only hold the coins that they want, that they think meshes with their value of why they invested in Bitcoin to begin with. And we also saw, and I think this is pretty obvious, hopefully once you think about it for a minute, that once the market starts to shift, once it starts to become clear which way it's going, the market moves very quickly. So this isn't something where it takes months to figure out. This will probably happen before a fork even happens, right? The futures market, within a few days, it starts to become clear which way it's going. Market participants are active in this, and then all of a sudden, the decision has been made, right? Because the market has spoken very clearly. This is ultimately the same for all cryptocurrencies. This isn't specific to Bitcoin. The Bitcoin community is obviously very different. The Bitcoin community tends to detest the developers and argue with them nonstop and disagree with everything they want to do, whereas other cryptocurrency markets tend to follow what the developers propose much more carefully or much more willingly. But ultimately, in any case, it is up to the market to decide. It's not specific to Bitcoin that the market decides. So okay, so great, the market decides, but what will actually happen? Will Bitcoin burn these millions of Bitcoin? I think it's not trivially obvious. So you might kind of intuitively just say, well, one side's going to have more supply, and one side's going to have less supply, so the market's going to prefer the side with less supply. I think that's true in many cases, but it really does depend a lot on the exact scenario that we're talking about. So many people who have this conversation are assuming drastically different scenarios as to when and how a quantum computer comes about, and thus end up talking past each other and aren't having a very good conversation about these issues. So the biggest question, I think, is kind of when and how market participants know that a CRQC exists, and whether there's broad, clear consensus about whether something exists when it exists. So currently the state of quantum computers is obviously very public, right? You have these for-profit labs, Google, IBM, whatever, Microsoft, who are announcing their results very proudly, they're bragging about it, and they're trying to raise more money so that they can keep doing the research, because it's very expensive research. My base case is that this largely continues. I don't see a strong reason why this wouldn't continue. Even if not every lab working on quantum computers is public, some competitive labs will be, and employees at other labs will leak, and those will be credible leaks that the market participants can evaluate. Others assume that this will shift, that all competitive quantum labs will become kind of public-private partnerships, and will be subject to national security secrecy rules, and there will be very minimal, if any, credible leaks. I'm skeptical of that for a few reasons. First of all, investors want to get their money back. If they're required to only sell their quantum computer to the government, they will limit their potential revenue from that and getting their money back from their investment, which has been millions of dollars over decades and will continue to be. But also, there are many labs, and it only takes one to continue to be public and be competitive for market participants to have a clear understanding of when and how a CRQC will be created. But okay, so we assume that it's market participants have some consensus around when a CRQC is going to be created. I think given that, this means the market will clearly burn the insecure coins, right? If the market participants have a clear understanding of when a CRQC is going to be an issue and by what deadline coins need to be frozen, then they will, because there's no strong reason why they wouldn't at that point, because then it really is a supply and demand question. There's no question, there's no like moral hazard question around like, are we freezing coins? Is this like questionable for the value proposition of Bitcoin in the long term? Or that question doesn't exist when it's very clear like a CRQC is going to exist plus or minus a year from this date. Like the original owner of the coin is not going to have access to the coin by that time, so there's no reason why we should be worried about that. So I think in that world, Bitcoin freezes the coins. I think on the flip side, if market participants don't have any consensus and any visibility into like clearly when a CRQC is going to exist, maybe that doesn't happen, because in that world, yeah, there's a moral hazard question. Bitcoin is making a decision to disable or seize coins that people who didn't screw up might still have access to. What is the threshold for that? And I think that the threshold for market participants in Bitcoin for that should be and will be relatively high, and it needs to be that it's very, very clear that a CRQC is going to exist by that point. Again, I find that very unlikely, but I think that is a possible outcome. Okay, so what's the plan, right? So I think over the next few years, as I mentioned, quantum computer PQC, so post-quantum cryptography signatures, will be an option. It is still early. It's still kind of in the cryptographic research phase, but it's making good progress. Adoption will be slow from wallets. That's something that will take time. Hopefully, as Q-Day approaches and the kind of regular drum of noise around quantum computers continues, that will drive people to adopt it. And especially as clarity emerges on when Q-Day is, I think that'll drive rapid adoption. I think as that clarity emerges, the Bitcoin investor community, the Bitcoin investor base, is going to decide, like, here's when the quantum insecure coins are going to be frozen by. There will be a fork, and I think the market will prefer the fork that freezes coins on some fixed date. but will allow any seed phrase-based wallets to get their funds back, right? So we're really talking about a tiny minority of wallets that is even potentially impacted here. That leaves one final issue that I think is relevant, and that is that some Bitcoiners might object to forcing early miners to either migrate, making visible that they still have their keys, or not allowing those keys to be burned, allowing those coins to be burned. This is kind of a reference to the Satoshi miner, or many people assume it's Satoshi, might or might not be, but the Satoshi miner, right? You don't want to necessarily force them to reveal that they still have their keys. But this could be also easily resolved with a commitment scheme where they just put their private key as well as a quantum secure public key in an up return, hashed in an up return long before Q day, and then they're able to use that to claim their funds at any point in the future. So sorry, I don't think we will necessarily get clarity on whether or not Satoshi still has their keys through the quantum fork. So I think putting that together, I think there's very little reason why there would be any coins left that haven't migrated or aren't still claimable after Q day and after some fork. And I think that the market will strongly prefer that. Given that, I think that the market will strongly prefer that fork over a glut of 1 million or 2 Bitcoin supply additional on the market, right? Not just 1 million or 2 Bitcoin additional that exists that was lost and now exists, but actually on the market live being sold every day. That's a huge potential amount of sale. Okay, so what does this mean for Bitcoin today? There is immediate work to be done, right? Starting the migration path for wallets now makes it easier in the future. That work is being done. It's in the cryptographic research phase right now. It will move then to the consensus phase and soft fork, and then up to wallets, and getting wallets to adopt it will be a challenge, but everyone's involved in that process. Everyone gets to decide when they move to a new wallet. Hopefully it's quickly. It's worth noting that the worst case outcome of kind of like this ASI outcome of, we get artificial superintelligence tomorrow, it makes huge physics breakthroughs, and we get a quantum computer in 2 years, doesn't actually look a lot different than the plan I just proposed. It looks pretty similar. The only difference is the rate at which people have to migrate and have to upgrade their wallets for those who don't have seed phrases or who want to avoid some large fee penalty to migrate afterwards. But it looks pretty similar. So because of that seed phrase based migration option, there isn't actually that much that you'd have to do to kind of create some mad rush to migrate before Q day. So yeah, I mean, Bitcoin wouldn't die, right? Even in that worst case, there is an option. There is a quicker path that looks similar, but just has less time for people to migrate. And so yeah, I mean, most of all, just don't panic. Work's being done, but also we have a minute, right? The ASI outcome is highly unlikely, given everyone who's been working on quantum isn't really talking about that, doesn't buy that. So we have some time, but also, good that we're getting moving. Thank you.